Thanks for joining us again for another edition of The Week That Really Was. My name is John McGurk. I'm the editor of Gript Media, and I am joined this week, as I always am, by my friend and my colleague, Miss Sarah Ryan. It's the 14th of December, 2023. This episode will actually be going out tomorrow, Friday the 15th, which is the day before I have to do my Christmas shopping, Sarah. I've been putting it off now for weeks, and I keep telling my wife that it's be fine until Christmas Eve, but she points out that Christmas Eve is on Saturday this year, and I really should get done before then. I assume you are more organized than I am.
Yeah, I'm getting there. But you see, the thing is, I don't think it's about, like, if you have a list and you know what you're getting, it's a doddle. It's the aimless walking around and not knowing what you're getting is the thing that'll kill you.
It is, but I'm somebody who just likes going in there, if I'm stuck for presents, I'm going to go to the bookshop and find books people would like. Even if they never read them, I've given them a present and it's thoughtful because it's a book they might like. And
yeah, I love getting books as well. Books are great.
Yeah, well, they look good on shelves, even if you never read them.
Well, I read a lot, and I'm actually on a roll at the moment. I've read like 3 or 4 books in a row that have been all really, really good. But I am married to someone who, like that old New York, I think it was a New Yorker cartoon where the wife says that, that one day the pile of books beside his bed that he was waiting to read collapsed and killed him. Keith has been reading the same novel since I met him 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Literally, he takes it out every year. We go on holidays and reads a few pages of it and goes back onto Twitter. Brilliant.
Yeah. I have to say I read less now than I did when I was younger because I struggle to find the time. And there's always something else. There's always something on TV, or there's something on the computer, or there's work or whatever. So I don't read as much. But I do try. I find Kindle great for that because I don't need physical books and I can bring loads around with me on my phone. And if I have a few minutes, I'm doing nothing, I can read a few pages. So that's how I fit it in. Anyway.
If you get into a good book, though, you make the time. You find the time to read it. You just have to get into it. I think reading is a kind of a habit you fall in and out of. Because I read a really good book and then I'd gotten into the habit and then I read another one and another one. I kind of read 4 books really in quick succession, and I hadn't read 4 books in the previous 2 years, if you know what I mean. So I think it's a habit.
Anyway, comments on last week's episode. Once again, thank you all for the comments on last week's episode. They were wonderful. I mean, somebody called Cheapy 2006 says Sarah is definitely a fine thing! ! And that they love the podcast on a Friday drive home. Well, thank you very much, Cheapy 2006, for saying those things. I mean, on the upside, somebody called 2 Pints of Milk said that I was a very good-looking fellow. But so I don't know who you are, 2 Pints of Milk, but I'm imagining you to be a very attractive woman. I suspect that might be inaccurate. You might have been joking, but I'm going to just stick with the version that's in my head. And most of the other comments were broadly agreeing with it. I'm not going to recap last week's episode. You can go back and listen to that if you want. But thanks so much for all the support and the listenership. We really appreciate it. This week, we're going to talk about surrogacy because there's a surrogacy bill going through the Dáil at the moment, and it was debated on TV this week and debated, both of us thought, in quite a one-sided way. But before we get to that, there were a few other things. The COP thing happened, Sarah, COP28. Paul Murphy locked some people in cars, or tried to, and then there was the revelations from my colleague Ben Scallon that bringing up videos of Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar and even Aodhan O'Riordain from just a few years ago sounding very suspiciously far right. So you pick one and tell us which one we'll start with.
Well, let's start with that because that's good, and that proves my point of that I was making on the podcast a couple of weeks ago about people going on these journeys, and how they completely change their views on things, according to whatever Una Mullally tells them to think or whatever you're having yourself. And I just think I took a lot of enjoyment of watching a video of Aodhan O'Riordain talking about the limited resources and how we don't have unlimited resources and we need to limit how many people we take into our immigration numbers. Comical.
The really funny thing.
Come over to the far right with us, Aodhan. Like the weather's lovely over here. It's great to have you. Like, just show absolute bullshit it is for them to be calling people far right for asking questions about immigration, how they're just drunk on moral superiority and virtue signaling that they don't even remember what they thought themselves a month ago. Pathetic.
Well, the really funny thing about that is that it was just a few days beforehand, if you remember, that Aodhan O'Riordain was, I don't know if it's Aodhan, whatever his name is pronounced. He was standing up this a yawn. He stood up in the Dáil and basically denounced Michael Healy-Rae for saying the exact same things that he had said just a few years earlier. Michael Healy-Rae has basically said we've only got limited resources. There are only so many people we can look after. We have to have confidence in the immigration and the asylum system. And you'd have sworn that poor Michael had come into the Dáil wearing a suspiciously shiny black uniform and suspiciously shiny black shoes and started waving with his right hand at people in the gallery. That's what you'd think had happened, given Aodhan's reaction to it. But in actual fact, he was just basically repeating what Aodhan had said just a few years previously. So it's very funny, and it speaks, as far as I'm concerned, to a political establishment that kind of has, the bigger problem here is not about immigration. It's that they actually don't really believe anything. They don't really believe anything at all, apart from the needs of the moment, whatever the needs of the moment might be. I mean, if the needs of the moment tomorrow require these people all to start sounding like Geert Wilders, then they'll do it.
It's not even the need. It's the trend at the moment. What's the virtuous position of the moment, and whatever that is, that's what they are, and it doesn't matter what they thought before. And with everybody else is far right. The irony that last week we were talking about Helen McEntee not being able to define what the far right is, we could scarcely define it ourselves, and that's because it's everyone. At some point, it turns out it's everyone, because everybody is apparently far right at some point. If this is what far right is, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's very funny. Just on a related note, and I know we didn't say we discussed this, but it just reminds me of kind of like this referendum they're holding. Did you see Neil Richmond on TV during the week?
No.
So Neil Richmond goes on TV during the week and basically says that the amendment that will change. Remember we were talking about this last week, the changing of the word definition of family from being marriage to other significant relationships.
Oh, I did see this. Sorry.
Yeah. And Neil Richmond goes on TV and says that one of the benefits of this will be that it will make it easier for people who have immigrated here to bring in more of their family members, because it'll no longer be just their wife. It'll obviously be anyone else with whom they've got a significant long-standing relationship will be able to come here under the new definition of family in the Constitution. And I was just thinking, there's one of two explanations here. Either he's deliberately trying to lose the referendum, or he's that out of touch that he thinks this is something that the voters of the country at this moment in time will see as a positive. Which do you think it is?
Yes, it was an interesting little conundrum, because I was so taken aback by that when I saw it, because I know Neil Richmond and I like him very much, and I think he's very smart, and I know people who've worked with him and helped him in his campaigns to get elected, and I think he's a very capable guy. So it's exactly what you said. It's a choice between, did he do that on purpose, like for some reason that we can't figure out, or is he really not aware of how inflammatory that what he's just said is going to be among certain circles of society at the moment? I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't think he could be that naive about the immigration issue. He couldn't. I mean, he's a Dublin TD. How could he be? So
yeah, it was very strange. And I mean, it wasn't dragged out of him. He volunteered that information, which was just, I thought, it'll be interesting to watch how that plays out. But I really can't figure out, and I want to endorse what you said about Neil. I've known Neil not well. I wouldn't say we're friends, but we've known each other for 15 years, longer. And I would endorse, I'd say he is, number one, he's an exceptionally smart person. Number two, he's an exceptionally nice person. Like one of the nicest people in politics if you meet him. And capable, and probably will go far in Fine Gael, assuming he holds a seat at the next election. But it was a baffling thing for him to say, which poses the question: does he believe it, or is he trying to lose the referendum? I suspect it's he believes it, and is just that out of touch with what public opinion on this topic across the country is at the moment. Because there's a lot of people out there, Sarah, when I say out of touch with public opinion, I'm not talking about people who kind of want to deport everybody, or people who are going to protests, or people who could say immigration is the number one issue. Just ordinary, regular, middle of the road people who think we've had a bit too much now at this point.
People like Aodhan, just not on today, other Aodhan.
Old Aodhan, old Leo, old Miho.
Old Leo, old Miho, old Aodhan. Just the version 1.1, of all of those people, and not version 13.9, which we're on now.
Yeah, I think it just all speaks to me, and we make this point, we don't want to be repetitive, but it all speaks to me to a political class that is kind of talking to itself, rather than the public. Anyway, speaking of people talking to themselves rather than the public, COP28 happened. It was all going to collapse.
They're very cynical, John. You're very cynical.
Yeah, I mean,
and also psychic.
Yes, I remember I did send a tweet the night before the deal coming through saying, look, this happens every year. Every year this thing is on the verge of collapse. There's hugely unacceptable texts in circulation. Poor Eamon Ryan is going to go home in failure. And then I said, don't worry, tomorrow there'll be a deal. It'll be imperfect, but they'll have pulled it out of the bag at the last moment. Eamon will have been up all night with the shirt sleeves pulled up, talking to the lads from America to get another 10 billion for poor country. It'll all be sorted. And it was.
Yeah. They'll fly in a pizza on a private jet to feed them because they'll be working late.
A whole pile of pizzas, Domino's pizzas. It's all very theatrical, and it literally does follow the same script every year. And once again, what we got was a document. I mean, I'm a bit of a global warming skeptic. Not I believe the world is warming. I believe humans are probably contributing to it, but I'm very skeptical of the solutions that are being put forward. But because there's this attempt, of course, to stop us ever hitting 1.5 degrees of warming by getting rid of all the fossil fuels and stopping flying and putting everyone out of their cars and getting us all back to living in huts and trees. And I'm very skeptical that the global public will ever go for it. And I think probably the money should be better spent on sort of adaptation strategies. That's what I think about all
adaptation strategies, and also innovation. Like, this is the argument that I have in my head with these. The problems arising from climate change will be solved by innovation. They won't be solved by some chubby, angry 20-something-year-old who's spraying a Christmas tree with orange paint, or, pouring out the milk and eggs in the Harrods food department like a goon.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that in World War II, because my wife is making me watch Oppenheimer at the moment. Not loving it at all. It's obviously a 3-hour long.
Keith's trying to make me watch it, so yeah, okay.
Well, you may like it. I don't love it. I've watched an hour of it so far. It's 3 hours long. I'm not watching all that in one sitting. So we watched an hour of it tonight, and we'll watch another hour tomorrow night as well. But it strikes me, one thing of that is that during World War II, there was this massive effort to obviously beat the Germans, the nuclear bomb, and all resources were poured into it. It strikes me that if you poured a fraction of the resources into trying to make nuclear fission happen, that they pour into windmills and all this other stuff, you could probably solve energy efficiency much more quickly. Because if they can just make fission happen, fission is where you fuse two atoms rather than splitting one, then fusion, not fission. Fission is what we have at the moment. Fusion, if you can fuse two atoms rather than splitting one, you create perfectly clean sort of sustainable electricity that replaces everything. But there seems to be very little effort being made on massive, big ideas that could actually solve the energy crisis, get us off fossil fuels without a reduction in consumption. And sometimes it seems to me like the whole point of the green thing is not to fix global warming, but to have a reduction in consumption as a good in and of itself.
Yeah, and also, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's very we're talking about changing. We're told all the time about changing behaviors and changing this. And we have to, what was the line that Aodhan said, that people need to accept that their lives are going to be very different and all of this kind of stuff. It's just very hard to take from people who are flying around the world on planes and, countries not fully participating that are, that in the time that we've been recording this podcast have probably created more emissions than Ireland did in the last week. You know what I mean? It's all a bit, I don't know. And it also just it always feels like another way to tell us, to virtue signal and to tell us how bad we are. and, how we could be better. And I think that the public are a bit tired of being told how crap they are all the time.
Also, people aren't going to accept it. Like, you can say this all you want about, people have to accept that their lives are going to be very different in the future. And it's all theoretical for the moment. And everyone, of course, can put up with a bit of a carbon tax. Rich people can take their grants to get a new heating system in their home. Poor people will continue to pay their oil, their kerosene or whatever, their gas, whatever they're burning to heat their homes. Those are all kind of small things compared to what they say we need to do. So you start telling people that actually, you're only allowed to leave the island 4 times in your life. No more holidays overseas. No more travel around the place. You don't get, you can't just sit in your car and drive to Dublin, as I occasionally, not as often as I should do. If you start making Tipperary to Monaghan, which is where my parents live, a journey that is massively arduous compared to what it is today, that's going to be immensely unpopular because the country is full of people who depend on our current way of life for very basic things like family connections. So the idea that this can be done strikes me as a pipe dream, especially when it's not a global thing. The Americans ain't going to do it. The Chinese ain't going to do it. The Russians ain't going to do it. So, I mean, you're basically talking about a few very woke countries in Western Europe talking about committing economic suicide to accomplish something that no one else is interested in accomplishing.
But also going back to the thing we've talked about before, which is scaring people. Like Aodhan, what was Aodhan's comment that the country would be underwater or whatever?
Oh, I forgot about this. Yeah.
And then was one of my favorite comment statements in a long time was NASA Horgan, Green Party TG, who referred to what he'd said as a which I just think is just so deadly, a hyperbolic turn of phrase, a politician who used a hyperbolic turn of phrase. Yes. So from now on, right, I just love this because I just feel like I tweeted about it. I was like, from now on, anytime I'm accused of misinformation, I'm just going to refer to it as that. I'm just going to say, oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, I was spreading misinformation. Oh, no. You misunderstood. It was just a hyperbolic turn of phrase.
Yeah.
What a load of shite.
What did Aodhan say again exactly? Wasn't it that Ireland will be underwater within 30 years? Half the country be underwater within 30 years. And I mean, just in case anyone is out there is in any doubt, there is no scientific projection anywhere in the world that suggests anything like that. The most pessimistic projection for sea level rise is 1.5 meters in 150 years' time. So in 150 years' time, Clontarf might suffer some flooding if they haven't built the seawall a bit higher than it is. Yeah. But we're not talking here about.
But he said that, and then he got all this backlash, and then people like NASA coming to his defense just were like dismissed the blatant misinformation that he has stated publicly as this hyperbolic. Say the word. Is it hyperbolic?
Hyperbolic. And the noun is hyperbole.
Yeah, hyperbolic turn of phrase, and it's like. So it reminds me of, like if someone's rich and famous, they go to because they're rich and famous, they go into rehab for sex addiction. But if you're not rich and famous, you're just a pervert. And it's like, if you're on the wrong side of things, if you're right wing, or you're spreading misinformation and everybody clutches their pearls and is outraged. But if you're on the right side, like Aodhan, it's just a hyperbolic turn of phrase. What a load of shite.
Well, this brings me into a concept I've been thinking and developing for the last while, which is that there are kind of 2 classes of misinformation in Ireland. So there's obviously unapproved misinformation, which we're all very familiar with. And unapproved misinformation is things like during the pandemic saying, oh, I don't know if I'll get a vaccine because I'm not sure that they'll stop the spread of disease. That's dangerous misinformation. And then you have approved misinformation, which is things that are untrue but help people come to the right conclusions. So, for example, if you say Ireland will be mostly underwater in 50 years, that is not literally true, but it helps the public come to the right conclusion about global warming, which is that it's an urgent problem. Therefore, it's kind of misinformation in a good cause. There's lots of examples of that. So the Journal did a bit of it today because they were reporting on a story that Sharon Keown reported last week from basically where a Bangladeshi family.
Yeah. I saw on. Yeah.
Yeah, the Bangladeshi family had come in here from the UK. They'd spent days in the UK. They arrived in Belfast. They got a train down to Dublin. That very same day, they were assigned to an apartment in a village in Westmeath, I think it was, in a little village called Cool. And Sharon Keohan had noted this and made it public, and she was assailed for promoting really dangerous misinformation. This is the kind of thing that doesn't happen. It's a shameful thing. Other politicians actually turned and said, this is disgraceful that an elected politician would spread this kind of misinformation. So the Journal then, a week later, and by the way, we checked the story, it was entirely true. The Journal a week later produces this kind of fact check of the story, in which their headline reads, let me just pull up the headline here in terms of what it says. The headline reads, "This is wrong. The misleading claim about a refugee family getting a free house in Westmeath." Subtitle, "The rumour has circulated widely online since last month." If you just read that headline, you think, okay, Sharon Keohan is talking bullshit. Obviously, it didn't happen. But when you read the story, it basically says, everything happened as she said, but it's very important to know that they don't actually own the house. They're only getting it temporarily from the Irish state. So
I saw her tweet, and then I read the comments, and
so I'm not exaggerating. Like, people said she was a liar.
Oh no, it was really nasty. I stopped reading because I know Sharon and I like her. And also, that's another thing, actually, lately, I've really noticed, like, you and I are doing a podcast, right? And we, like case in point now, we're just criticising Aodhan, right? Aodhan O'Riordain. I don't agree with Aodhan O'Riordain about 99% of the things he thinks or whatever. But I just find it fascinating the way people carry on Twitter and stuff. Even, like, maybe, and you've been subjected to a lot of this, but I stopped reading because it's just so much poison and I don't want to drink it. Like, I'm all for, like, debating things with people or whatever, but, like, I'm trying to think of something about Aodhan that's obviously not true. Aodhan O'Riordain has a great head of hair on him, right? So the idea that I would go onto Twitter and be like, "You're a big bald," like when people go into, like, really nasty I just don't get it. Like, why do you feel the need? Do you know what I mean? It's just so, like, I just don't understand why people feel the need to get so personal and turn the internet, like Twitter. And I agree. As I'm saying it, I know people are going to say, "Oh, it's so naive. That's always been going on." I'm telling you now, you could go into my Twitter feed right now, read back through all my replies, and you will not find one tweet of me, like, being nasty about someone's appearance or, like, attacking them about stuff like that. I just don't understand that.
A few years ago, in a moment I'm not particularly proud of, I got really annoyed at Colm O'Gorman, formerly of Amnesty Ireland, and I think I told him that he was a disgraceful stain on the national discourse, or worse to that effect. Well, that's about as mean as I get. I regret it. I shouldn't. I lost my temper, and when you lose your temper like that, you kind of lose any argument you're involved in. But I always find, I think it was, and I know I'll get in trouble with some people for approvingly quoting Margaret Thatcher, but she was subject to a lot of obviously abuse. People might agree or disagree whether it was warranted, but one thing she said always stuck with me, which is said, "I'm always encouraged when they attack me personally because it means they've not got one single argument left." So if I say something and somebody comes back to me with, "That is wrong for this reason, this reason, and this reason, and you really should have read up about it before saying it," that's actually more wounding to me than somebody saying you're a fat slob or you're a disgrace, or, you know, the usual stuff I get is usually kind of psychologically orientated. It's an attempt to take you down a peg or two by going, "No one listens to you, everyone thinks you're a joke," blah, blah. That's the kind of stuff I get more actually than the physical stuff. Women, I think, get the physical stuff more. Women get that kind of abuse, and it's awful. But it doesn't bother me that much.
Anyway, I saw sometimes did you ever watch that movie Billy Madison?
No.
Well, there's this really funny scene, and they're doing a quiz, kind of like Jeopardy, and one of them answers this question obviously wrong, but, like, really, really, really wrong. And I have it here on my phone. It's so funny. Sometimes I just post the GIF of this back to people, and it's the presenter of the show. When he says the wrong answer, the presenter says, "Mr. Madison, what you've just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I've ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. There's a kind of a gif of that, and sometimes I just respond that to people because it just says whatever. But like that's about as mean as I get, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I was reading the Sharon Kip, and they just some of it was just so nasty, and I was like, oh God. And now it's turned out that she wasn't lying, but not one person will ever go back to her and say, "Oh, sorry about that, Sharon."
Oh,
Seems
it's
like
worse than that. It's not that no one will ever go back and say, "Oh, sorry with that. You were actually correct. I apologize." It's that a lot of those people will continue to insist that she was lying until the dawn of time, or they'll do what they did with us at Gript when we reported that the attacker on whatever date it was Algerian. They will say that you shouldn't have reported that, or you're racist for being worried about it, or any of those things. I mean, the script always changes.
But now you can just say that was a hyperbolic turn of phrase.
Well, that's true. That's true. A hyperbolic use of facts. Anyway, let's talk about surrogacy.
Oh God, this is tricky, hey?
It is. I mean, I kind of feel a little bit okay talking about surrogacy because I have no kids and I understand exactly what people who can't have kids are going through. I've said before in this podcast that my wife and I are in the luxurious position of not being particularly upset about it. Maybe that'll change as we get older. Who knows? But I doubt it. But who knows? You can never know what you'll feel in 20 years' time, I suppose. But I do know, and I've known couples, Sarah, who have gone through what can only be described as the mental anguish of trying to conceive, being unable to conceive, and feeling unimaginable pain as a result of it. Known some of those couples, so no one should take that lightly. And I suppose for some of those people, if you're listening, surrogacy probably feels like a potential godsend. So I suppose before we talk about this, I think Sarah and I have similar opinions on it. And we want to say to people that our opinions on that are not directed at you personally and shouldn't be taken that way. We recognize how painful that situation is, but unfortunately, rights have to be balanced. And I think we both feel that proposals to regulate commercial surrogacy don't really balance those rights, Sarah. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I mean, like I have 3 children, and I wouldn't say that was like I would say that wasn't an easy journey, but it was definitely. I mean, obviously the result ended well, and also I would say it was on the it was difficult, but it was on the milder end of difficult compared to other people. And I've seen friends and the struggle to get pregnant, and it's hell. They literally go through hell, and back to try and have a baby. So I'm familiar with that. But there's issues here, and it's funny because I've kind of changed my so long time ago. Not I suppose 15 years ago, I worked with somebody who was a good friend of mine, and his wife had been a surrogate for her best friend. And this is in the UK. And I remember at the time thinking, like, what an amazing gift it had been. And I was friendly enough with him that I had loads of questions. And like, we were good pals. We were working away from home, both of us. So we'd go for dinner, and I asked him a lot of questions. I was like, what was it like? Like, they already had 2 kids themselves. They were done having kids. And I was like, when you came home from the hospital with no baby, like, what was that like? And he was really honest. He said that it was difficult, but ultimately the gift that she'd given her friend kind of outweighed that and whatever. And I was kind of fascinated by the whole thing. So I feel like that type of surrogacy and commercial surrogacy are kind of different. And I think, I think it's really hard. I think that people who really want a baby and this is their only way to have a baby, you wouldn't want to take that away from them. But there's a few issues. One is, I think that there's a bond, the carrying of a baby and the job of carrying a baby being taken on by somebody because of their poverty is just tricky for me. I feel like, as I got older, like, you hear these stories and it sounds wonderful. Oh, this woman, we traveled to another country and this woman had carried a baby for us. But, what if she carries 10? Like, is that, you know what I mean? Like, is that taking advantage of her situation? Like, I had 3 full-term pregnancies. I found with every pregnancy it was harder on the body. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. it's a very tricky subject, and I think that there is a bond and a link between the mother and and that baby. That's not a nothing thing to me. And you see these videos of people doing skin to skin with a baby that the surrogate is now gone, and I don't know, John. There's something. There's things about it that make me feel sad for the bond between the mother or the woman who carried the baby and the baby.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the difficulty around having this conversation is that people don't want to hurt the feelings of people who have, in good faith, adopted surrogate children,
yeah,
or employed people to have their babies for them. But I think there comes a point when you're talking about these issues that you have to say, like, which is something, a mantra I live by. I would never intend to offend anybody, but I think it's very important that you don't say things you believe, that you don't shy away from saying things you believe to be true in order not to offend somebody. So if you are offended by this, I'm about to say, I apologize. It's not my intent to offend you, but if you're offended by it, well, it's my opinion and it's honestly held. And that opinion is as follows: babies aren't commodities. Yeah, if you can, we had in this country, something you said to me earlier on today, Sarah, which stuck with me. We have a scandal ongoing in this country. It's not over yet, of the sale of babies from orphanages in this country to the United States from so-called fallen women when they were put into mother and baby homes, and people came over and literally paid the nuns for their babies and took them off. Those babies may have had good lives in the US, but we all instinctively recognize that buying them and selling them from out from under their mothers was a terrible thing to do. I don't think that gets much better if the mother consents. Or
but in a lot of cases, in a lot of cases, the trauma there wasn't what the trauma that we heard from wasn't the mother's. It was the child's. That when they grow up, and I know somebody in particular, particularly close to me, who's now a man of 70, who was adopted. And there's the trauma there of never knowing, where he came from and who his mother was and what was the circumstance, and you know what I mean. So, like, that's in our that treatment of women and children, and children not knowing where they came from or who their mother was or what the circumstances is in our DNA. Like, that's in us as a country. We've sat and watched the Late Late Show or whatever it is, and watched these cases and been made aware of the importance and the trauma of a link being broken between who you are and where you came from. And I don't know that this is that different.
Yeah, I don't think it is. I think it's morally pretty much the same thing.
But there's also, sorry to interrupt you, but there's also different things here. So there's a legal loophole in Ireland, for example, where if you go to another country and you have a surrogate in another country and you come home with that baby isn't recognised as being yours if you didn't carry the baby. Do you follow? Even if that egg was your own.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I know people who've gone to, say, for example, for Spain and used donated sperm and donor egg and come back pregnant, and they just don't say anything to anybody, because once you give birth to the child in Ireland, even though that child is biologically not related to you in terms of the embryo is not your egg or your husband's sperm or whatever, because you gave birth to them in Ireland, you're the mother. Mm-hmm. That's the way the law works. So I know people who've done that and have just come back, said nothing, and that's it. But if you come back with a child that you didn't carry, there's a legal loophole there where you're not recognised in Irish law as the mother, and that's a legal loophole that needs to be addressed, and that's absolutely fine. But what you're saying, like, there's different versions of surrogacy. There's a surrogacy where my egg is let's say, use myself and Keith as an example. Myself and Keith's embryo is implanted into another woman. That child is DNA wise is ours, right? Another woman carries it, and that's surrogacy. But then there's also situations where I get an embryo that's half Keith's, not my egg, and that's implanted into another woman. So now the child is carried by one woman, but actually biologically related to another. Do you follow?
Yeah. And not related at all to the,
and not related at all to me. So, like, the surrogacy with our embryo, and then the surrogacy with donated embryos, and they look like the same thing, but they're not. Do you know what I mean? So you could have people later desperate to know where they came from, who had a very happy life or whatever, but also very keen to know, well, who is the woman who donated the egg, and who's the woman who carried me, and who am I, and where do you know what I mean? And like, I think that's like tricky.
And I think it's important to remember when talking about these questions, these are questions most of us never have to wrestle with. So we can't, I think, comprehend how existential they are for people, because the vast majority of people listening to this, the vast majority of people in all our lives never have to wrestle with these questions. We know who our parents are. We know where we came from. There are obviously some people amongst us who are adopted, but they're a minority. The vast majority of people never have to wrestle with these questions. And so writing them off as insignificant, I think, is a mistake.
Yeah, but because, like, you know, what a privilege to know exactly where you came from. But that's my point, in that we know, and, you know, like it's obviously different if you're adopted and you're, you know that you were given up. You don't know, maybe you don't know the circumstances, but that caused trauma. So we have no way of knowing how these children will feel when they grow up, and what they'll want to know about, you know what I mean, who they are, what will they place more value on, the woman who carried them or the woman who donated the egg? How will it work? How will they feel? We don't know. And I don't think it's a nothing question to expect, or I don't think it's like irrational or at all irresponsible to ask questions and expect that these children might someday have these questions. And it's hard to talk about it, as you say, not trying to upset or offend anybody. But I also think, John, like a lot of things that we talk about on this podcast, a lot of people secretly have these questions. They secretly wonder about this stuff, and they're afraid to ask.
I have to say, first of all, I agree with everything you said. Particularly about a lot of people having, like, what I might call kind of qualms about this, but not feeling confident enough to air their opinion, because a lot of times people feel that they don't have enough knowledge, or they don't want to upset people, so they kind of have these qualms and they keep them quiet. I have a huge qualm about sort of the precedents it sets, because I think once you go down the road of saying that you've essentially got the right to pay for a human being to be created and for somebody else to carry it and bring it into the world. I mean, anytime you commoditize something like that, you create a customer and you create a salesperson, and you create, therefore, the expectation of sort of quality service. I think that there are huge issues around, once you accept that I can create a baby, why can't you then accept that I can genetically modify that baby to create an intelligent baby or a blonde baby? Or, I mean, I saw a clip last week of an American surrogate couple who were bragging on TikTok about how they had gone through the process. It had cost them about €250,000. The couple in question were same-sex male couples, so they were bragging about how the catalog they used, because they literally had a catalog of women. I think it was from either Colombia or Argentina, it was South American country, and all the women in the catalog had been to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or an Ivy League university, and all of them were, in their words, had supermodel looks because they wanted a beautiful, smart baby. And they were willing to pay a premium for a beautiful, smart baby. And that, to me, has huge ethical implications, because you get down. What happens if halfway through that pregnancy it turns? I mean, this has happened. Where halfway through the pregnancy it turns out that yes, your beautiful, smart baby is going to be a beautiful child with Down syndrome, or some other,
or cleft lip, or a cleft palate, or something, anything.
Yeah, and there have been cases where people have actually sued their surrogates, forced them to have an abortion. And I don't care what your views on the morality of abortion are. That's not this conversation. It is the precedent we are setting about the expectation of perfection in children. And I think that I guarantee you, Sarah, that had your child been born with 14 toes instead of 10, you'd have loved them anyway, because you want a healthy baby that's your child who you love unconditionally. But I'm concerned when you go down the road of commercial surrogacy that there's an expectation that the child actually has to live up to some expectations. And I don't think that's there with natural parents, because there's a kind of there's a procreative instinct in people that binds them, obviously not in all circumstances tragically, but in the vast majority of cases binds them to their own offspring. And if you go down the road of saying, well, I can just go through a catalogue and pick the genetic characteristics, in effect, which is what you're doing, you're going through a catalogue of women that I want in my child, that creates huge ethical implications about the future of human life. And I think it's the biggest single problem with it. Like you, I want to say I have no difficulty with somebody being a surrogate for their sister voluntarily, or for their close friend, or whatever, once no money is changing hands. But I would ban all payments for surrogacy in the morning, and I would do it without a moment's hesitation.
Yeah, it's. I think I know the couple you're talking about in America as well, and I was just like, there was a kind of a cartoon going around online about, drawing comparisons to The Handmaid's Tale. Like that women just being kind of like vessels to have babies for other people. And
well, in that video, they actually said, the couple in question, and they were joking, but it was I thought it was a really off-color joke. They said, yeah, it's kind of like a form of prostitution. And it is. It is like you're essentially. I mean, if you're engaged in prostitution, you're buying a woman's body for 20 minutes. If you're engaged in surrogacy, you're buying it for 9 months.
Yeah, I mean, but also, like I'm, like, I think that there's something you're acting as if that the bond between the mother and the child is irrelevant almost. And and having carried 3 children myself, just not sure that that's true. And like the idea, I don't know, it's just like I ultimately I think that, like, as you say, like your sister or your best friend or whatever is a completely different set of circumstances than what is effectively, to me, looks like taking advantage of somebody's poverty to get something that you want. And like it's different in Ireland because we don't really have, a huge number of children that are looking to be adopted. But in countries like the States, they do. And I don't understand. There's something about it. There's something about that kind of like. I don't personally speaking, like if I had been unable to have kids and I lived in a country that had a lot of kids that were looking to be adopted, I 100% would have adopted. Do you know what I mean? I would love to foster children, but that I'm voted down on that by Heath. But I know a lot of people who do, and they find it incredibly rewarding. I think that, like, the prostitution example is it sounds like it's dramatic, but it's not really, because it's having someone else who's in a circumstance where economically they're poor and they need money and they're using their body for something that you want, and you're taking advantage of that.
There's also the other issue here, and I mean, we don't shy away from difficult conversations here, and I know some people will say this is singling out same-sex couples, but to me, there's something deeply unsettling about bringing a child into the world and deliberately from day one ensuring that child will not have, either in the case of a female couple, a male figure in its life as a parent, or a female parent. I think that is a choice that you're making for a child that I don't think you have the right to make. Am I being too edgy there? But I don't think I am. I mean, I think it's wrong for a same-sex couple to essentially purchase a child from a woman and then deprive that child of a mother for essentially its entire childhood. I'm not saying that they're bad parents. I'm not saying that they don't love the child, but I'm saying I believe that there are differences between men and women. And I mean, I don't know about you, Sarah, growing up, but like, I had very different parental experiences from my mother and father, both of which were unique and valuable in their own way, but either of which would have been entirely terrible on their own.
Oh, well, I mean, I mean, one of my most kind of firmly held beliefs is that the two parents offer, very different roles to children, and particularly, and I could literally talk about this all night about boys, and the need for boys to have a male role model, a father. Obviously, people, like, circumstances happen, people end up, their fathers die and different things. But optimally, there's data that shows that optimally boys do best if they have a strong father figure in their life. And so, and a certain type of discipline. And you can literally track social problems, particularly in the States, is where they've done the studies. of males and of young males and their likelihood to finish full-time education, their likelihood to end up in prison, their likelihood to end up in trouble, their likelihood to do this, that, and the other, and the relationship between that and whether or not they had a father. This is a fact. This isn't, you know what I mean? This isn't me like, you know, singling out single mothers or whatever. It's just unfortunately, boys do very well from having a father.
Yeah,
mothers have a different role. I also think that girls, and when I look at friends, like the relationship with the father that the girls have with their father is the blueprint for the relationships that they have for men in their life, and they do well to have a good one. Like that's just the way it is. Like you know, I have members of my family who are single mothers. I'm not saying they're not good parents; they're excellent parents. But kids do best from having both parents. That's just the way it is. Keith brings something completely different to the table than I do. We both have our roles, and I got very different things from both of my parents. So, like, optimally, yes, like people have both parents, and I agree with you. Like, it's such a hard topic because I have lots of people who are a few in particular same-sex couples who have children who I think are excellent parents, and I hate the idea of them feeling like that I was criticizing them or coming down on them in any way. I'm really not. But I think that, like, you know, there's hard questions in this. There's hard conversations, and the difference, by the way, in surrogacy, John, if you have a same-sex couple, is that, you know, very often, like in surrogacy, there's a potential that the child isn't related to either of the people at all, if you know what I mean. Whereas in same-sex couples, that's not always the case. Do you know what I mean?
In mixed-sex couples.
In mixed-sex couples, yeah. So, like, it's really hard because, like you said, like, I really don't want to upset anybody.
Yeah, but can I? And just to elaborate on what I'm saying, I mean, I don't think I'm not saying that gay couples necessarily make bad parents. I'm actually in favor, and this will annoy some people on the other flank. Maybe I've always been in favor of gay adoption because I think that some parents are better than no parents, and I think if you're a child who's in need of adoption and there's a loving same-sex couple that's willing to adopt you, then you're the luckiest child in the world. But that is substantial.
And you and I are 40, and are like, well, I'm 40, but like we're old enough to know multiple people that are our age that we grew up with who had frankly shite parents, who were same-sex parents, who did a number on them, who turned them into
who were opposite-sex parents. I think you're saying there.
Sorry, opposite-sex parents. Sorry, who did a number on them, who turned them into, you know, problematic adults in whatever way, whether they're alcoholics or incapable of having adult relationships or whatever. But people whose parents did an absolute number on them by virtue of the fact that they were crap parents and they were same-sex parents. So, you know, like, you're absolutely right in saying that, like, there's loads and loads and loads of same-sex couples who would be better parents than straight couples or whatever. But still,
well, it's a matter of choice. This is what I'm saying. It's about it to crystallize it down. There are lots of children out there who, through circumstances, aren't brought into what I think you used the word optimal, the optimal family situation. And that is, there are lots of really good single parents out there who are struggling. There are lots of mixed sex couples who've adopted kids who are doing a really good job. But there's a difference between helping out a child who's in need, or a child ending up in having a single parent or a same-sex couple or whatever by circumstance, and deliberately paying to bring a child into that situation. There's a moral difference, and I think that for me is at the core of the surrogacy issue, because you're not putting this child in a situation where it has no mother in its life because of circumstance. You're deliberately choosing to do that. You're making an active moral choice to do it, and I think that's deeply problematic. And I that's on that side. And then I think there are also issues with regard, as you so elegantly pointed out, to the women who are being paid/exploited to do this. So yeah.
So, you know, if you have a lesbian couple and they just have a child non-surrogate but just via IVF, it's kind of the same thing, though, isn't it?
It is, and of course, gay male couples don't have that option.
Yeah. So. Like,
I look, is that perfect? No, it's not. Is it perfectly fair? Absolutely not. I fully accept that. But like, life isn't fair. It's not. I mean, it's a function of your gender. I mean, where does this end? I mean, if I found myself, if she finally had enough of me and kicked me out in the morning, and I found myself single again, can I, as a single dad, avail of surrogacy to have a child for myself to keep me company in my old age?
Yes.
And I mean, I think there's an issue with that. I because I can't, you know, I do think there's an issue with that because they're like, I don't think I should be able to buy a baby. I think
that's an interesting point now you've just made there, because that kind of, because the thing is that, like, we're dancing around, and it gets tricky and it gets tough because we don't want to upset anybody, and we're not trying to diminish same-sex relationships. But if you just take what you just said just there, right? So you're a straight man. If your marriage ended and you were just a single person, should you be able, if you're really wealthy, should you be able to pay a surrogate to have a baby just for you? And you say no.
I say no, because I mean, I don't think I have the right to do that to a child. First of all, to deliberately bring them into the world, knowing that at the time I'm doing it, obviously I might meet somebody down the line, who knows? But the time that I'm doing it, I am deliberately.
This hypothetical life of yours, yeah.
It's a hypothetical life. I mean, glad Mrs. McGurk probably isn't going to listen to this for a few days. Yeah. But in this hypothetical life, I don't think I would have the right just to hand over some money and say to somebody else, have my baby for me. And then you say goodbye to the baby. You never see it again. Off you go. And I bring this child into the world, knowing as I do so that child will never have its mother in its life. I think that's a horrendous thing to do to a child. I wouldn't have the same qualms about going to an adoption agency and saying, look, if there's a child there who really needs a home, I'm willing to give him one. Because that child already exists. I'm not making a choice for that child for its only existence to be one without a mother in its life. So yeah, to me, from where I'm coming from, my moral perspective, that would be a deeply wrong thing to do. I can understand why some other people might look at that a slightly different way, but I don't agree with them.
Why do you? What's your understanding of what other people would say about that? That it's your right because it's half yours?
That everybody has a right to have a child, that a child brings huge joy to you. I mean, every argument that gets made, I find, tends to be about the person having the child and very little about the children themselves. So, there's, I can, that the person has so much love to give, that they want to share, they want to do something good, they want to leave a legacy to the world, they want, all the reasons people have for wanting to have children. The argument essentially comes down that you've got a right to do that in every circumstance. I don't think you have a right to do that in every circumstance. I think you have, you can have the opportunities to do that with the right person. And if you can't bring a child into the world naturally by yourself, then God knows there are plenty of kids in the world who need a loving parent. And I that's why I think surrogacy is just a terrible idea. Because also, you go down the road of, if I decide to have a child by myself and I'm ordering from my catalogue, I'm obviously going to pick the smartest woman, the best looking woman I can, to have and then the child becomes a commodity, becomes a fashion accessory, becomes a look at my beautiful, smart child, rather than the child who I want just for the sake of loving it. So yeah, I think it preys. I think surrogacy preys on kind of people's needs, but also brings out their worst instincts. That's what I think.
Yeah, I think where I come down is, I think if it's non-commercial, it's just completely changes the whole.
And I agree with that.
The whole, it's like there's lots of people who are very anti-IVF, and there'll be people a lot of pro-life people are very anti-IVF, and there's the mentality of, for me, creating life versus, it's different. Do you know what I mean?
I completely. By the way, I'm not one of those people. Like I agree with you. Your morality there is exactly aligned with me. If your intent with IVF is to conquer infertility, have a child that is your own, and your intention is to bring a life into the world, then I don't see it. I recognize, I completely respect those who talk about what about the other embryos and all the rest of it. But
yeah, again, that's reasonable questions to ask. And, you know, I know people who've done IVF and very happily and who've had, you know, multiple children and then have had this huge conundrum at the end with embryos that are left over and what they should do and been quite, you know, torn about it. And it's not, you know, these are questions that arise from these kind of things. But ultimately, I think that the mentality of IVF and the joy that IVF brings and people who want to bring life into the world is completely different. So I think it's the same. It's kind of similar in a similar vein. I think that the principles of surrogacy out of love for somebody else and helping somebody else to bring life into the world versus being paid to do so are different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in complete agreement. As I said earlier on in the conversation, if it's somebody wanting to do something really kind and special for their sister or their best friend or wherever, I completely understand that, and I think it's in fact it's noble. But I think when you go down the road, and this is what, by the way, what we're regulating in Ireland now is commercial surrogacy. So it's literally the ability to go into an agency somewhere in Dublin, look at a catalogue of Ukrainian or Brazilian or Colombian or whatever they are women, and say, I like the look of that one. And how much is she? Oh, 100,000 euros. Yeah, that's it. We'll happily pay her for that. Because the other thing we haven't talked about, Sarah, and we're running out of time, is the exploitation of the industry, the potential for the industry to exploit people. So you're paying 100,000, but how much is she actually getting of that? Like, you know, every time they talk about legalizing prostitution, the argument is, well, it cuts out the pimps. Because we know that women who are in a position where they're selling their body for whatever reason are often desperate and being exploited for it. And I think the other thing, I've never had a baby like you, so I'm going to ask your opinion on this. But for me, I don't think it's a decision you can make with full information, because I think that women who give birth, and every woman I've ever spoken to who has given birth for the first time tells me that nothing prepared them for the bond they felt with that child. And I don't think you can enter a contract to hand that baby over knowing exactly what you'll feel when you have it. And I think it must, there are undoubtedly women in the world who've gone through surrogacy, given birth to the baby, and realized, this is my baby, I can't hand it over. And then, like, I just think it opens so many cans of worms that it's a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these chemicals. I mean, I think it's like describe the chemical, you know, the chemical event that's happening in your body after you have a baby and how you bond with the baby and all of these things. I just can't imagine, you know, like just, you know, and also, you know, we're thinking about it in terms of, you know, doing it once and then going, oh, and then the difficulty in handing this baby over or whatever. But like in a lot of cases, these people are going to be doing this multiple times.
Yeah,
that's even worse. That's even more grim. Like,
well, it must be.
After a while, you'd stop feeling that. It'd just be an event that you'd go, oh yeah, whatever, and go back to doing it again. Like,
that's it. I mean, I always think that the thing that we don't talk about in the modern world at all, and when it comes to relationships and babies and sex and all that sort of stuff, is the very well documented reality of sort of female psychophysical bonding.
mm-hmm.
If that's the right word. So, do you remember when you were in school? I don't know. I mean, and this is always mocked by liberals in Ireland. Do you remember? I don't know if you were in school and you got that sex ed talk where they ripped the bandage off all these times. Do you remember that? And they were like, the first time you had
sellotape. It was sellotape.
Was it sellotape?
Yeah.
But
that you lose your stickiness.
Yes. But
you have to explain that now quickly. Go on.
Yeah, so like the basic theory behind that is that when, particularly in the case of a woman has sex with a man, her body releases sort of chemicals and hormones and all the rest of it that make her feel like really in love with him.
Mate for life. Mate for life.
Mate for life. It's an instinctive sort of bonding ritual, and that is why. For example, first loves are often the ones that hit people the hardest when the relationships end. And the basic theory of the cell tape is that basically the more partners you have, the more emotionally disconnected from sex you become. And I look, it's controversial. There are people who won't agree with it, but I think I've always thought there's something to it, and it relates to giving birth. Like there's that natural, your body releases chemicals to make you bond with the baby, just as it releases chemicals to make you bond with your sexual partner. And that's all for good evolutionary reason. And I think in society we ignore that and we downplay it and we pretend that, like you know, the modern woman, the modern man can overcome it. And I just don't think it's true.
Yeah, like the Samantha Jones and Sex and the City thing.
Yeah.
I nearly laughed because I knew what you were going to say when you started to say it, and it's just been the subject of many, many wine-filled arguments amongst me and my female friends over the last, whether or not this is a thing, and I'm not 100% sure we've solved it, but I think that there's an element of truth that men and women are different, and I'm talking about like, the women, old-fashioned women, John, the ones with vaginas, um,
Not
that
not not the cool new upgraded
oh,
versions.
the cool new women, but that women, you know, and men are different. I know that's controversial to say, but it's true, and that like their sexuality and their behaviors around sexuality and relationships are different. And I think that, obviously there's exceptions for every rule and all that, but ultimately there's truth in that, and that ultimately over the years of having a lot of casual encounters, and this goes for men and women, that if you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Tinder one night interactions, that the act becomes less meaningful. And I think that that's true, and I think that that's a hill I'm happy to die on. Not saying that you have to be a virgin until your wedding night, but that having sex with hundreds of people definitely changes the meaning of the act for you. And
Well,
I think that
I think a simpler level, I would say that the emotional costs of casual sex are lower for men than women. Put it that way. That's
yeah,
how I would sort of characterize it, and that there are emotional costs, and people don't talk about them because it's not cool to talk about them. Because it's kind of the equivalent of
prude and your far right religious, we're just far right religious freaks who don't know anything about real life or dating or whatever. But yeah, I think that that is true, and I think that if you apply that to having multiple pregnancies for other people, there's something unbelievably depressing about that to me.
Yep. Well, on that depressing note, we'll leave it for this week. You wouldn't know it was nearly Christmas with the depressing conversation we had this week. We hope it wasn't that depressing. We hope it was interesting and thought-provoking for you, wherever your thoughts on that issue or any of the other issues we raised are, and let us know in the comments. Next week, we'll be back with a much more upbeat, Christmassy episode as Sarah gets ready to cook for, how many people is it, Sarah? Did you say at the start of the show? 16? 17?
16.
Yeah. And
Oh,
I prepared to go to somebody else's house and have my sandwiches handed to me. The contrast in our lives sometimes makes me feel guilty. All right, listen, thanks everybody for listening. We will be back next week with another edition of The Week That Really Was.